Okay, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ayanna Pressley. I'm the Congresswoman for the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. Thank you to Representative Bush, my sister in service, who is certainly not new to this advocacy. I'm grateful for your steadfast sisterhood and support. Thank you to this broad and diverse coalition of justice seekers who have stood shoulder to shoulder with us, pushing on this priority. And I want to underscore this for years, for many years. Today, on Human Rights Day, we call on President Biden to do the right thing, to use his clemency authority to commute the death sentences of the 40 individuals on death row, to resentence them to a prison term, and to save lives. State-sanctioned murder is not justice. And the death penalty is a cruel, racist, and fundamentally flawed punishment that has no place in our society. It is deeply discriminatory and has disproportionately been weaponized against Black, brown, and low-income families for far too long. It is long past time for President Biden to make good on his campaign promise to address the federal death penalty. With 40 days left in his presidency, we must move with urgency and ensure that history never repeats itself. We all watched with horror as the first Trump administration went on an unprecedented execution spree at the end of its first term, executing 13 people in a matter of months. That was more federal executions than the 70 years before. Let us not forget that on this very day in 2020, Trump executed Brandon Bernard, who was a teenager at the time of his crime. Devastatingly, we know the incoming administration is poised to go on yet another execution spree. In the document formerly known as Project 2025, which we know is very clearly just Trump's agenda, they outlined their cruel plans for the DOJ to execute everyone on death row and expand its use to even more people, all while bypassing due process. It is a terrifying reality that President Biden must address now. And he can do that by commuting the sentences of everyone on death row. He has the power and he has the authority. Now, this is not only the just thing to do for President Biden as a man of faith and in honoring his campaign promise to address the federal death penalty. It's not just good policy, it is also good politics. President Biden has the support of a broad and diverse coalition of global and national grassroots organizations who support ending the federal death penalty, and many of them are standing right here today. And this is an opportunity for President Biden to use his power for healing and not harm. And we cannot stop there. Congress must also pass my bill with Senator Dick Durbin to abolish the federal death penalty once and for all. And Congress must pass our legislation, Representative Bush, myself, and Representative Jeffries, the Fixed Clemency Act, which we introduced 3 years ago at this very podium, the Fixed Clemency Act, to transform our broken clemency system. And President Biden must use his clemency authority to address mass incarceration, to reunite families, and to set our nation on a pathway to healing. Mr. President, you and you alone have the power to save lives, and you must use it. This is a matter of doing the right thing, and it is a matter of legacy. Next, we'll hear from my sister in service on so many issues of consequence, Congresswoman Cori Bush, representing Missouri's 1st Congressional District.
Woo! Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to my sister in service, none other than the Representative Ayanna Pressley, for convening such an important press conference at such an important time at such a moment in time where we can shift history. And the president has the ability to do that. And everybody standing up here with us has the courage, the will, and the fortitude to keep pushing to make this happen. Today, as we heard Rep. Pressley say, is Human Rights Day. A day that reminds all of us around the world of our shared responsibility to fight for dignity, to fight for justice and freedom for all people. Today's Human Rights Day falls during a lame duck session, a time when President Biden faces little political opposition to fulfilling the promises he made in 2020. Promises we've been reminding him of. Promises like ending the federal death penalty, promises to confront the long-standing injustices, and I'd like to say, like the backlog of clemency petitions that defined our so-called justice system. I'm not sure what he's waiting for, but the only time better than yesterday is today. That's why we're standing here now, to call on President Biden to take control of his legacy by addressing the thousands upon thousands of clemency petitions awaiting action. And that includes those in prison for nonviolent or drug-related offenses, elderly and chronically ill, those on death row, people with unjustified sentencing disparities, and women who were punished for defending themselves against their abusers. Behind every single petition is a human life, a life hanging in the balance. His clemency power is not just a tool. It is his responsibility, and it is power that he asked for. And among those whose lives hang in the balance, I'm going to bring up one person in particular, although there are many, and I know we will hear from them. Leonard Peltier, a symbol of the deep injustices within our justice system. Peltier has spent nearly 5 decades in prison. He is the longest living indigenous political prisoner who just turned 80 years old a few months ago. His trial was rife with prosecutorial misconduct and glaring violations of due process. And his case has drawn global condemnation, with human rights organizations, with world leaders and advocates all calling for his release. President Biden has the opportunity to finally grant Peltier the clemency he deserves. Clemency would not only free an elder whose health is failing, but also serve as a profound acknowledgement of the injustices faced by indigenous people in this country. To leave Peltier to die in prison would be a stain on this nation's conscience again. Justice demands his release. President Biden must also commute the sentences of all 40 individuals on federal death row, because state-sanctioned murder, as we just heard from my sister in service, isn't justice. It's an irreversible failure. 1 in every 25 people on death row we know is believed to be innocent. Imagine being wrongly convicted, period. Imagine then being sentenced to die for a crime you didn't commit. 1 innocent life taken is one too many. If even 1 innocent person is executed by the state, the system is broken, and that singular failure ought to demand an entire reckoning. But we also say even 1 life, regardless, is one too many. We remember the Trump administration's 2020 execution spree. It was a spree. It was this horrifying display of state violence that shocked the world. And now Trump's Project 2025 agenda, it openly calls for expanding the death penalty by bypassing due process and executing even more people. We cannot allow history to repeat itself. The federal death penalty is a barbaric, inhumane practice, most often weaponized against the most vulnerable among us. And let's be clear, the history of this country is one where our carceral system has disproportionately targeted, arrested, and harshly sentenced Black and brown people. The overwhelming majority of people on death row are Black and brown. Too often, Black and brown communities suffer the most from both the death penalty and harsh sentencing laws. It's essential that we right those systemic injustices, and President Biden should use his executive power to do it. President Biden has the power to save lives, power to reunite family, and prevent 40 more people from being executed by the next administration. Broad coalitions of national and grassroots organization, those folks standing right here are ready to stand with him. We as members of Congress also are ready to stand with him should he decide to do this, and he should. Because justice is not about punishing people. It's about restoring humanity and dignity. It's a belief in second chances. President Biden has a chance to choose healing over harm, compassion over cruelty. He must keep his promise to end the death penalty. And let me say this, Missouri has been, I have to shout out Missouri, has been at the forefront of this fight, including with my Missourians Against the Death Penalty family who's here today, Michelle Smith, as we have been calling for clemency and to end the death penalty at the state level. We understand President Biden must keep his promise. He can commute the sentences of all those on federal death row. Lives depend on it. History will remember what you do, what you choose to do. And remember, this is a choice. This is a choice to save lives or a choice to decide that you just won't. Next, I will call up Cynthia Roseberry from the ACLU.
Thank you for having me here today, Representative Pressley. Your work to abolish the federal death penalty gives us strength in the moments like these. Thank you also, Representative Bush, for your good work. As we get closer to a second Trump administration that has plans to go on and execute another execution spree, we call on President Biden to change the course of history and establish a lasting legacy of racial justice by commuting the sentences of those on federal death row. We've long known about the racial disparities in the use of capital punishment in the United States, from the death penalty's racist roots that are deeply intertwined with our dark history of racial terror and lynchings, to the current undeniable racial disparities of those who are sentenced to death. Black adults represent 11.7% of the population, but 38% of people on federal death row. Over half of those on death row are people of color. Further, when Donald Trump went on his execution spree in the final 6 months of office, a time in which he executed more people than the previous 10 administrations combined, over half of the people he executed were people of color. Racial discrimination permeates every single stage of the criminal legal process, and the federal death penalty is no exception. Black people are more likely to be charged and arrested and sentenced to death, and more likely to be executed, more likely to be excluded from the juries that decide their fates, and more likely to suffer a botched execution, and more likely to be falsely convicted and sent to death row. There are black men on federal death row who were sentenced by all white juries across the United States. 200 people have been exonerated from death row, and the vast majority of those wrongfully convicted are people of color. I want all of us to take a moment to let that sink in. What would your life look like if you were condemned to die, Representative Bush, for something you didn't do, right? Your death sentence facilitated by persistent racism in a criminal legal system that we know is flawed. Imagine the lives taken on death row before they can be proven innocent. That's not something we can continue to allow. President Bush must live up to his commitment to racial justice. President Biden, thank you. President Biden, right? Thank you so much. Must live up to his commitment to racial justice and his promise to abolish the federal death penalty. He can do so by commuting the sentences of the men on death row. We come together today to call on President Biden to use his constitutional authority to spare the lives of 40 men, and in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice. I now leave you with Abraham Bonowitz.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yes, I was looking for you. Okay.
I'd like to welcome Reverend Risher and Charles Keith and Lisa Brown to stand with me. And please stand with us too. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Representative Pressley, for being such a leader on this issue. We have been proud to collaborate with you since before you even introduced the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act. When I called your office, the next day DeMarquin called me back, and we've been working together ever since. I also want to thank May and Ricardo, and your entire staff have been terrific. Your staff has been terrific, and we really appreciate it. Standing next to me, Lisa Brown, whose son was Christopher Villalba, who was executed by Trump in 2020. Reverend Sharon Risher, whose mother and two cousins were among the 9 victims of the Emmanuel Church massacre in 2015. Both of them will be speaking at the Rayburn Building. What is it, 22? In the Rayburn Building at 2:30. So please come and hear their stories then. Reverend Risher is my boss, the chair of the board of Death Penalty Action, and also behind me our Impacted Communities liaison, Charles Keith, whose brother was once 13 days from execution, and another brother, his murder remains unsolved. 4 years ago today, they executed Brandon Bernard. I was here with a bunch of us at Black Lives Matter Plaza when that execution was scheduled. They had a big crowd in Terre Haute. The next day, 4 years ago from tomorrow, Alfred Bourgeois was executed, and nobody was talking about it. The execution crowd, the protest there was much smaller. And it was a month later when I found out that actually he had a credible innocence claim. And nobody is talking about it. They're still not talking about it. Please visit alfredbourgeois.com and learn about that case, and the question has to be, how many more are going to get executed and they're not even talking about their innocence? And we have to do something about procedural bars. It's a whole other thing. Death penalty action was started in 2017 when Donald Trump was inaugurated. A whole bunch of us were over there under that lie that's carved into the face of the U.S. Supreme Court building, equal justice under law, and we were arrested for protesting. And on our way home, Donald Trump was being inaugurated here, and we knew that federal executions were coming up. We protest every single execution that happens in this country, every time, innocent or guilty. That's right. And we know that if President Biden doesn't act, whoever he leaves on death row is there for Donald Trump to execute. So today, Death Penalty Action delivered our letter, which has more than 430 organizations signed onto it in support of repealing the death penalty, which President Biden can't do on his own. He needs a bill to sign. But what he can do is commute all these death sentences. And what he did do, and I want to applaud him for that, he has appointed an attorney general who has not sent him any execution dates. And that was enough to stop that execution spree. Today at 11 o'clock this morning, we started on the ellipse where you could see the White House before us, and we launched the calling hours. You can call the White House from 11 to 3 p.m. on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And that's what we're asking people to do, is call the White House 11 to 3 p.m. from on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and ask the president to commute these sentences. So please make sure to do that. If, as I said, if President Trump doesn't commute these death sentences, then he is preparing Donald Trump to conduct what could be the largest set of mass executions since the Indian Wars. That's what we should be prepared to do, and that's what he's promised to do, and we should believe him on that promise. So please act now, President Biden. Commute all the death sentences, and also order the warden at Terre Haute to take a bulldozer to that death house, abolish the death penalty, and demolish the death house. I also want to just thank everybody and applaud the Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing people and L'chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty, that are here standing with us, and so many others that have come out today. Thank you all. And next is our friend Benga. Am I saying that right?
Yes, Benga Kinaba.
Thank you.
Writer, actor, and ambassador for the Free Billy Allen campaign.
Thank you, Congresswoman Pressley and Congresswoman Bush. I feel honored to be here next to you. You all always choose the hard road by doing the people's work. And I don't know if you know how many fans you have out there, but I feel honored to be here next to you. Thank you. Thank you. If we truly believe that every life is precious and every lost soul can be found, how can the death penalty stand in a just country? It cannot. It is our most lethal example of systematic injustice that in no way serves to heal the public or prevent crime. The death penalty is a lie we must untell. The United States maintenance of a death row program is nothing more than a national kill list produced by a society that preaches equality at every turn but falls short, particularly in our criminal justice system. In the final weeks of your administration, and after so much bloodshed at home and abroad, President Biden, you have an opportunity to redeem the lives of not only the 40 men on death row waiting to die, but their families and our communities. A nation that continues the barbarity of executing its own citizens, despite its disproportionately racist applications, betrays all its citizens by violating its sworn promise to protect and guarantee the rights of life and liberty. The crime committed by a society that executes its own citizens is made even greater if we carry out the execution of innocent people like my friend Billy Allen. With over 165,000 signatures and voices worldwide, we ask that President Biden grant Billy clemency and release this innocent man. An eyewitness puts Billy across town at the time of the bank robbery, and with no evidence tying him to the crime, it's time to send Billy home. Shouldn't the burden of proof to take Billy's life at the very least consist of evidence placing him at the scene of the crime? DNA? Anything? Shouldn't that be the bare minimum if we're talking about the irreversible decision to kill Billy Allen? Billy has been robbed of his entire adult life for a crime he did not commit. He was 19 when he was arrested and sent away. We are pleading with you, President Biden, to take a step towards justice and release Billy from prison. President Biden, in your final days in office, please join the broad and diverse coalition of national and grassroots organizations who support ending the federal death penalty. President Biden, on this day, on this Human Rights Day, let us dismantle the tale of two systems, creating one in which justice is not meted out by what families you are born into, but by the blind and impartial evaluation of evidence and application of justice. We are asking you, President Biden, to keep your campaign promise and commute the sentences of everyone on death row. Free Billy Allen.
And next, I do want to just, as we keep the program going here, Dr. Yusuf Salam, an exonerated member of the Central Park Five, was unable to attend today. However, his mother, Sharon Salam, is here on his behalf. No? Okay. All right. We're nimble with this. Okay. Well, she's here in spirit. Okay. And so now we'll hear from Shuya Graham, an exonerated member of our community, who is here on behalf of Witness to Innocence.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor and privilege for me to be here today. My struggle started 35 years ago. I was a young 19-year-old man fighting for my life. I'm not here today because of the system. I'm here today in spite of the system. It was two young children that I never knew until later on in my life decided one day not to go to school and fight the criminal justice system and to learn about the criminal justice system. And during that time, I got a chance to know those young students. I survived four trials. My first trial ended in a hung jury. My second trial, I was convicted and sentenced to die. And to those who say, how do it feel to be condemned for something that you didn't do? It's an awful feeling. It's a feeling that still lives with me today, 35 years later. So as I went off to death row, those young students, they was the ones that had come up to see me, sitting in Bryan. And they said to me, Sujar Graham, we're going to get you out of here. And I said to myself, my life is finished. What can some young students do against the power of the state of California? Little did I know. After being on California's death row for over 3.5 years, my case was overturned because they systematically excluded all African Americans off the jury. And you would have think in my third trial, I would have a jury of my peers. Again, my jury ended up all white. Again, the jury couldn't determine my guilt or innocence. At this time, during my fourth trial, I'm 31 years old, been in prison 11 years. I couldn't conceive for the life of me if they convicted me how I could go back and start all over again. But I was a very fortunate man. In my fourth trial, we fought it hard to get African Americans on the jury, but it wasn't no place for them in my trial. So we ended up with an all-white jury again. But in this trial, we were very fortunate. This jury came out with a verdict saying not guilty. And I said at that time, after 7 long years, my greatest nightmare has finally come to an end. 35 years later, my friend, I'm still suffering from the consequence of a wrongful conviction. I'm here today to ask President Biden to please consider commuting the sentence of all people on the United States death row. Commuting their sentencing will make our nation a better nation. Commuting their sentence will make the criminal justice system a less violent system. So today, my friends, I ask you all to continue to do the work that will free people like myself from the cruel and unjust reality of the death penalty. We have had the death penalty for so many years in our society, and it solved no social problem. So continue to fight to end capital punishment in the United States and all over the world. Abolition today, abolition tomorrow, abolition forever. Thank you all very much.
Amen. Thank you, Shia, for reminding us why we're all here today. And now, I'm sorry? Okay. Now we'll hear from Sharon Salam. No? Okay. Y'all just roll with me, okay? People are coming, so just roll with me. Now we'll hear from Shane Claiborne. We got a lot of S names here, y'all. Work with me, okay? Shuya, Sharon, Shane. We'll now hear from Shane Claiborne, author and faith leader. We thank you for your solidarity and your voice today. Okay. It's okay.
I'm humbled to stand beside all these incredible friends, and at the heart of this movement is folks who have been directly impacted, like the folks we heard today. But I also speak as a Christian, as a pastor and theologian, and I just want to say one of the deeply troubling things about the death penalty is that it would not stand a chance in America without the support of Christians. In spite worshiping an executed and risen Savior who put death on display to subvert it with love and forgiveness and an empty tomb, we are still the biggest supporters of the death penalty. 90% of executions happen in the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is the death belt. And so if Christians like Joe Biden, like our governors and legislators would lean into the best of their faith. They would see a Savior who we recognize and remember this month of Christmas, who said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy," who said, "I did not come for the healthy, but for the sick," the one who interrupted an execution to say, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." So this is not just a political issue, it is a spiritual and moral crisis. When I was an evangelical growing up in the Bible Belt in Tennessee, we had bracelets that said, WWJD, what would Jesus do? We know what Jesus would do. Jesus shows mercy. The question today is, what would Joe Biden do? What will you do? And we are asking you to show mercy. It's unthinkable to think that God will say, you should have killed more people. We know God will say, blessed are you, for you showed mercy. We're thankful that the Pope spoke out calling for the commutations. We need all of us to show moral courage right now, especially those of us who follow Jesus. You cannot worship the Prince of Peace on Sunday and support the death penalty on Monday. So Joe Biden, we need you to commute the death sentences, demolish the death house, and abolish the death penalty. It's a gift to be here today with all of you. Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.